وما يخفى على الله من شيء في الأرض وما يخفى على الله من شيء في الأرض ولا في السماء. الحمد لله الذي وهب لي على الكبر إسماعيل وإسحاق إن ربي لسميع الدعاء. رب اجعلني مقيم الصلاة ومن ذريتي رب اجعلني مقيم الصلاة ومن ذريتي ربنا وتقبل دعاء. ربنا اغفر لي ولوالدي وللمؤمنين يوم يقوم الحساب. ولا تحسبن الله غافلا عما يعمل الظالمون إنما يؤخرهم ليوم تشخص فيه الأبصار. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. آمن الرسول بما أنزل إليه من ربه والمؤمنون كل آمن بالله وملائكته وكتبه ورسله لا نفرق بين أحد من رسله وقالوا سمعنا وأطعنا وقالوا سمعنا وأطعنا غفرانك ربنا وإليك المصير. لا يكلف الله نفسا إلا وسعها لها ما كسبت وعليها ما اكتسبت ربنا لا تؤاخذنا إن نسينا أو أخطأنا ربنا ولا تحمل علينا إصرا كما حملته على الذين من قبلنا ربنا ولا تحملنا ما لا طاقة لنا به واعف عنا واغفر لنا وارحمنا أنت مولانا أنت مولانا أنت مولانا أنت مولانا فانصرنا على القوم الكافرين الله أكبر بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الله أكبر ولله الحمد بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إنا أعطيناك الكوثر فصل لربك فصل لربك وانحر إن شانئك هو الأبتر صدق الله العلي العظيم صلوات.
Thank you for the beautiful Quran recitation. Let us have a loud salawat. Next, I would like to call upon Brother Ahsan to come up for a salam. Let us welcome him with a loud salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
صلوات. I am Zainab Zahra, hear my tragedy. Join me in my grief, mother, and mourn with me. I am Zainab Zahra, hear my tragedy. Join me in my grief, grief mother and mourn with me. Mother, do you know what happened in Karbala? Mother, do you know what happened on Ashura? Hear my story, my trials and misery, sorrow and pain, wails and calamities. I had to witness all my loved ones suffer. Yet all I saw was beauty in Karbala. I am Zainab Zahra, hear my tragedy. Join me in my grief, mother, and mourn with me. I had to hear the cries of mothers one by one, from Layla to Ramla, as they all lost their sons. With an arrow, Harmala, he showed no mercy. Just 6 months old, he killed Azhar, he died thirsty. As the arrow hit Asghar would shake his feet, whilst in Hussein's arms, lifeless under the heat. I am Zainab Zahra, hear my tragedy. Join me in my grief, mother, and mourn with me. Abbas would go to quench our thirst, to bring water. Instead he'd die, mother, he'd go to his slaughter. They struck Abbas with an iron pole on his head, whilst on his horse he'd fall to the ground where he bled. They severed from him his left hand and his right. With an arrow they'd aim to shoot his eye. I am Zainab Zahra, hear my tragedy. Join me in my grief, mother, and mourn with me. Mother, I saw Shimmer sit on Hussein's chest. He'd cross his leg whilst grabbing my brother's head. Zahra, this was not an easy test. to see shimmer with his dagger sever his neck. Allahu Akbar, his head high on a spear. Horses would trample, the bones crush, I could hear. I am Zainab Zahra, hear my tragedy. Join me in my grief, mother, and mourn with me. To Sham I was taken captive. What a journey along the way. Tide and ropes they would drag me. My hands are shackled with all the heads in front of me. I'd see Hussein, his eyes would move and gaze at me. Shimmer would laugh, and with his whip he'd hit me. If only, mother, you were here with Ali. I am Zainab Zahra, hear my tragedy. Join me in my grief, mother, and mourn with me. I am Zainab Zahra, hear my tragedy. Join me in my grief, mother, and mourn with me. Salawat.
Thank you for that beautiful recitation. Inshallah, these lectures will continue until next Thursday, and we would like to all of you to come and join us every night, and inshallah invite others to join as well. Without further ado, I would like to call upon Hujjatul Islam wal Muslimin, Sheikh Jafar Ladak, so he can enlighten us with his knowledge. Let us welcome him with three loud salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
For the love of the Holy Prophet Muhammad al-Mustafa, one loud salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala. Please open your Qur'ans to Surah Al-Baqarah, chapter number 2 of the Holy Quran, verse 245. We will also refer in our introduction back to the verse that we looked at last night, Surah Muhammad, chapter number 47, the last ayah of the surah, verse number 38. So if you have that to hand as well, it will be of benefit, insha'Allah. For the love of Aba Abdullah al-Hussein, sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli. And to ask Allah to hasten the appearance of Imam al-Mahdi, ajjalallahu ta'ala faraj al-sharif, sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين خاتم النبيين سيدنا الممجد بشير المصدق المصطفى الأمجد محمود الأحمد أبي القاسم محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين واللعنة الله على الظالمين من الأولين والآخرين أما بعد فقد قال الله سبحانه وتعالى في كتابه المجيد وقوله الحق بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم من ذا الذي يقرض الله قرضا حسنا فيضاعفه له أضعافا كثيرا والله يقبض ويبسط وإليه ترجعون آمنا بالله صدق الله العلي العظيم صلوا على محمد وآل محمد Awaited Savior of humanity, Imam al-Mahdi alayhi salam, my respected teachers, elders, brothers and sisters, and dear guests, Assalamu alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. عظم الله أجورنا وأجوركم بمصابنا أبي عبد الله الحسين صلوات الله وسلامه عليه. Let us take a moment and recap some of the salient points that we have been making in the last couple of nights. Our series entitled New World Arising is premised on the idea that the last 12 months of the world has created such a huge global shift within the thinking, the awakening, the demands of people, that the way in which we attend the majlis of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam also needs to be in the context of the world that we are experiencing in the reality of today, as well as the world that we want to be able to forge in the coming 12 months. Our discussions in the previous nights have included the topic of the tartib and nuzuli, the order of the revelation of the Quran, its sequence. And through its example, we stated that none of the acts of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam were random. Rather, through the sequence, we can see what the priorities were for the Prophet, and when he wanted to make social change in pagan Arabia, what the challenges were, and how every surah of the Quran challenged different elements of it, and gave us that sequence that gives us an edifice and a structure by which we too can begin to understand the roadmap and the way in which social change occurs. We mentioned that the Arabs, they were burying their daughters alive. They were performing circumambulation of the Kaaba naked. They were at constant war with one another because of tribal rivalries. They would systematically steal the wealth of orphans and use it for themselves. And on and on and on it went. Do you think that when the Prophet ﷺ sought to create such grand social change and stop and intervene on these evils, that it was just a random set of lectures that all of a sudden inspired people to make social change at this huge level? Of course not. It would be ridiculous for us to be able to suggest such a thing. The tartib al-nuzuli and the sunnah of the Prophet and the sunnah of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam demonstrated the order by which they made those challenges and the way in which they emphasized on certain projects and issues first and foremost and developed them. Last night, we started talking about the subject of the institutions that are needed within a community. And we mentioned that some of the institutions need to reflect those things which are wajib within the community. And then secondarily, other institutions reflect other levels of needs of the community. And then later on, a tertiary set of needs come about and allows us to be able to see the institutions. Yesterday we gave the ayah from the Quran, chapter number 9, verse number 60. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions a series of institutional causes that the Quran demanded us to participate in. Do you remember what the verse said yesterday? فَرِيضَةً مِّنَ اللَّهِ. That this is an obligation from Allah. Yet, as we challenged yesterday, the majority of those projects, those institutional causes, our community in many cases aren't even aware of them, let alone actually having projects that participate in those causes. I gave you an example yesterday. For riqab, to be able to free slaves from their slavery. Slavery 1400 years ago was a part and parcel of the Arab society. And as you know, globally present only until a couple of hundred years ago. Islam had dozens of verses and traditions that systematically called upon the Muslim community to free slaves, to purchase them out of their slavery, to educate them so that in their own way they can shift the economic situation of the time. I asked you yesterday, do you know of any Muslim or Shi'i organization that helps slaves out of their slave trade and their bonds today? No. Why? If I was to ask you how many different Shi'i organizations look after orphans, you'll name me 20. And that's important. Looking after Aitam, orphans, is one of the institutional causes that are mentioned within the Quran. May Allah bless those organizations that look after the orphans. Hadith from the Holy Prophet Muhammad al-Mustafa sallallahu alayhi wa alih said, ittaqu fi dha'ifain. Be very careful of how you treat two parts of the community that are generally considered weak, that are always abused. One were the orphans, and one were the women. Be careful of how you treat them. Be careful of how you treat the sisters. The orphans and the women. Two sections of the community that are often abused because they are made vulnerable. Think about this. The fact that the Quran has these institutional causes, it tells us that that should be where our efforts lie, first and foremost. There are many things that our community ends up focusing on, fighting about, arguing about, blood, sweat, and tears go into things that have no real concern or matter. How many times do you hear people in the community arguing about nonsensical things? Wasting everybody's time. 5 minutes here, 10 minutes there, 20 minutes. Collectively, years go by and we are still fighting about nonsensical things. Especially in the month of Muharram. How many times do you hear people arguing over, is the blood of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam tahir when it was shed? Is the blood of an azadar tahir? So on and so forth. Nonsense debates that have no value in the real world. The Quran gave us the causes and the institutions that we were supposed to set our sights on. Now, amongst the discussions that we had in the previous night is one hermeneutical issue that I want to raise again. A way in which we interpret the Quran, a way in which we interpret the Sunnah. I mentioned to you on a previous night, as well as last night, that sometimes certain causes take priority over others. We have a myriad of causes and institutional things that the Quran asks us to constantly be pressing the cause of. Let's just say, for example, there are 30. Just pick a number. Say there are 30. You will say we only have a certain amount of wealth in the community, a certain amount of bandwidth in the community, time, capacity. So where and how do we prioritize? I mentioned one way is to understand that at the time of the Prophet, he prioritized certain things. What were the priorities? Right to life. Do you remember? Right to freedom of speech, right to freedom of religion. These were the first things that the Quran set its vision and eyes on. It challenged the elite of the time. It stopped female infanticide and burying of children after they had been born. It stopped the theft of the wealth from the orphans, and we talked about why. At certain times, it calls upon us to prioritize certain projects, tasks, certain institutional causes. Yesterday, I mentioned some institutional causes that the community can partake in. For example, we mentioned the issue of tabligh. And I gave you the whole story and history of Bilal Muslim Mission that's converted tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of indigenous Africans across the continent of Africa to the path of Muhammad and Ali Muhammad alayhi wassalam. I also mentioned the example of Second Chance Books under Sheikh Mateen, and you also know Sheikh Anwar here in the community doing phenomenal work with prisoners. Every week, every month, 5,000 prisoners across the United States of America are receiving books, receiving care packages. This is an institutional cause that the Quran mentions. And I gave you the example that we don't have to recreate the wheel, reinvent the wheel. We can participate in these things or bring these things to our community or start these things in our community. These are the causes that Islam drives at. Now, I'm going to give you a hadith that should spark some thought about institutional causes in Islam, in the community, and how sometimes certain causes are preferred over the other. Yeah? And I'm going to show you the extent by which the hadith would emphasize certain causes at certain times. And based upon that, we then pivot to our topic of tonight, which is how those institutional causes are not only about the community, the Muslim community, but more pivoting towards humanity at large, and have a national and international and even potentially a global emphasis on them. And the idea is to see that if you want to be able to make change at a national level, or you want to use the Islamic institutions to make a change, a moral change, being a moral force on this country, what are those examples that the Quran and Ahadith provide you? But before I can go there, I want to be able to demonstrate how sometimes the Ahadith emphasize some causes over others. Sometimes because they are priority. Why? I gave you the example. Right to life is a priority over everything else. If there is killing, or if there is a lack of respect for human life, before anything else, before you change a society, right to life has to be emphasized. And that's why I mentioned to you BLM a couple of times as an example of that movement. This hadith doesn't emphasize the issue of right to life as the reason for priority. It goes back to the time of the Muhajirin and the Ansar. Do you recall I mentioned to you the Muhajirin had left Mecca, migrated to where? Medina al-Munawwara. They had left all of their belongings, and then the Ansar of Medina, the helpers of Medina, the hosts of the city of Medina, divided everything they had into half. They kept half for themselves and they gave half to the muhajir. In this context, I also mentioned to you the ayah of the Quran that for charity should go to the muhajirun. Why? Because they are stuck within the land. They can't travel because their previous business contacts have had sanctions placed upon them. Do you remember that verse? In this context, I'm mentioning to you the hadith, and I want you to note the emphasis on one particular act. That act is called qarf. What is qarf? Who can tell me what is the meaning of the word qarf? It is a loan. Ahsant. This hadith comes to us from the Holy Prophet Muhammad al-Mustafa sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wasallam. And I want you to see how the Prophet emphasizes the act of qarf, loan giving, as an institutional cause, and he gives such emphasis that the mu'mineen at that time understood the emphasis was delineating priority in that time. I'll read the hadith to you. من أقرض أخاه المسلم كان له بكل درهم أقرضه وزن جبل أحد من جبال رضوى وطور سيناء حسنات. Whoever lends his Muslim brother a loan, for every dirham, it would be worth the weight of the Mount of Uhud, which is from amongst the mountains of Radwa, and yield the goodness of Mount Sinai. So immediately the hadith shows you that there's an emphasis on what? Thawab. Whoever gives a loan to his Muslim brother, every dirham, every dollar, let's say, the reward is worth the weight of Mount Uhud and yields the goodness of Mount Sinai. Okay, how heavy is Mount Uhud? Hands up, how many of you have been for Umrah or Hajj and visited Uhud? Many of you. How heavy is a mountain? It's a stupid question, isn't it? But you understand. The hadith says for every dirham or dollar that you give, every dollar that you give, you receive the reward of the weight of a mountain. And you receive the reward, it has a goodness, a yield of goodness of what? Mount Sinai. Why is Mount Sinai important to us? Which Prophet ﷺ received revelation there? Musa alayhi salam. So can you see immediately that there's something special going on here? It's an extraordinary emphasis. I'm going to go deeper now. Look, same hadith. Prophet continues. وَإِنْ رَفَقَ بِهِ فِي طَلَبِهِ تَعَدَّ بِهِ عَلَى الصِّرَاطِ كَالْبَرْقِ الْخَاطِفِ اللَّامِعْ بِغَيْرِ حِسَابٍ وَلَا عَذَابٍ. And if the seeker of the loan, pay attention to this hadith, it's very important in the theory of what we're trying to talk about. If the seeker of the loan, the borrower, is kind in his asking for the loan, it will count for him on the day of judgment that he would pass the day of judgment as quickly as a flash of lightning, without being even held accountable for any punishment. Just be very conscious of what I'm telling you. Let's say you need a loan of $1,000. Is that all right, Sayyid? Okay. Sayyid comes and asks me for $1,000. The hadith says, if he asks politely, the reward is that he gets to cross the entirety of the day of judgment as quick as a flash of lightning and no adhab for him. Does that make sense to you? Is the act comparable to the level of reward here? No. All you have to do is ask me nicely. Now, normally when you go to ask for a loan from someone, you probably ask nicely anyway. No one goes for a loan like, yo, why are you so mean? What kind of horrible person are you? You donkey. Give me $1,000. It doesn't work, does it? By nature, you ask politely. I'm stuck this month. I'm a little bit short. I've got this coming through at the end of the month. Can I borrow $1,000 from you, please? And I'll pay you back. Can you see? You wouldn't say anything other than that, would you? So think about this as a question. Be really perceptive here. Why would the Prophet have to emphasize politeness with such an incredible reward? Hold on to the answer. Continue with the hadith. وَمَنْ شَكَى إِلَيْهِ أَخُوهُ الْمُسْلِمِ فَلَمْ يَقْرِضْهُ حَرَّمَ اللَّهُ عَزَّ وَجَلَ عَلَيْهِ الْجَنَّةَ يَوْمَ يَجْزِي الْمُحْسِنِينَ. And the one who complains about his Muslim brother asking for a loan, Allah will prohibit from him paradise on the day of judgment, ordinarily when he would pay back every good doer. Huh? Brother comes to me and he asks me for a loan, and I complain about it. Allah makes Jannah, paradise, haram for me. Again, it's a bit strange, isn't it? Surely I have the right to complain. Surely I have the right to say, man, Sayyid, it's the second time this year he's come to me and asked for a loan. No? Don't I have the right to be able to complain? Okay, even if I don't have the right to complain, is it such a sin that is equal to making Jannah haram for me? Is that just by Allah? Yes or no? So what do you think is going on here? Humility. What else? What are we talking about? Priority. We are saying at that time, in order to create the bonds of brotherhood between the Ansar and the Muhajirin, in order to ensure the Ansar invested in the Muhajirin, in order to make both communities working closely, trusting one another, aware of one another, lift them out of temporary need and back to financial affluence and independence, the level of emphasis that the Prophet gave on loaning one another money was that he said, if you even just go up, don't be shy, go up and ask for a loan, do it politely, and you will receive this level of reward. And then he warned anyone who refuses the loan, or worse, complains about his Muslim brother, Allah prohibits from him Jannah itself. Do you understand? Do you understand? Allah's messenger increased the level of thawab and the warning of adhab temporarily in order to get the system of loans between two new communities working together. The moment the community was no longer in need of that, the messenger normalized the emphasis, and there was no more grand emphasis at that level upon the giving of qard. Do you understand? Everybody understand? If you understand, give me a salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. This happens many, many times in the ahadith. I'll just give you a simple example and you will understand it. Sometimes you see that there are, I'm going to use a word, but you'll understand what I mean, exaggerated levels of thawab for going on ziyarah of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. Have you seen those? If you take one step, it's like 70 hajj and thawab. Have you seen those narrations? Why? Because at that time, the taghut, the caliphs of that time would literally kill the Shia for going. Literally. And say, okay, there's two of you going, choose which one of you dies. The other one can go to Karbala. No problem. You've got two hands. Choose one hand, you can keep it. They would literally say these things. So in order to make sure the emphasis remained and no fear remained in us, and our willingness to even die for Hussein's ziyarah, salamullahi alayh, the ajr was increased temporarily. When the threat was removed, the level of the ajr was also normalized. Do you understand? This is how the hadith of thawab works. Now, do you see from this hadith that at that time, where was the level of emphasis being given as to where your wealth should go? If you were mu'mineen at that time, if you were the Ansar, and there with the Muhajirin, and the Prophet gave you this hadith, what would you take away from the hadith? You would understand. What was your immediate priority with your wealth? To do what? Ahsantu. To give qard, to help the Muhajirin get on their feet, to start making the Muslim community independent again, thriving, prospering. And obviously, once that moment had passed, 3 months, 6 months, a year, then the Prophet would normalize the discussion and say, you can start giving charity in other causes now. Do you understand? Excellent. If you've understood this, you will understand that in our community, when there is an emphasis on certain institutional causes for our community, or certain causes that we need to participate in, you will see that those causes have to be understood in the context and in the time in which you live in where certain institutional causes can make impact, where it can actually yield the best outcomes, or where is needed most at that particular time. Please open the Quran to Surah Muhammad, chapter number 47, verse number 38. This is an ayah that we mentioned yesterday. But now, having understood this hadith about how there are pressing needs, some priorities are given more importance over others at certain times, have a look at this ayah of the Quran. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Ha antum ha'ula'i tud'auna litunfiqu fi sabilillah. فَمِنْكُمْ مَنْ يَبْخَلْ وَمَنْ يَبْخَلْ فَإِنَّمَا يَبْخَلُ عَنْ نَفْسِهِ. Behold, you are those who are called to invest in Allah's way. Amongst you are those who are miserly. You won't give even though Allah asks you to give. And amongst you is the who is miserly. And whoever is miserly is only miserly against his own soul. Why? Does Allah need your money? No. What does the ayah continue to say? Wallahu al-ghani. Allah is absolutely self-sufficient. وَأَنْتُمُ الْفُقَرَاءُ. It is you who are in need. Invest in yourselves. وَإِن تَتَوَلَّوْا يَسْتَبْدِلْ قَوْمًا غَيْرَكُمْ ثُمَّ لَا يَكُونُوا أَمْثَالَكُمْ. If you turn back from this, if you don't invest in the needs of your community, Allah will bring a new community in your place. And they won't be like you. They will actually invest in the causes that are needed. So I raise a question. What do you think are the causes today, July 2024, New York, United States of America, that Allah's book and His messenger would prioritize? Ahsan, Palestine for sure, without doubt. The most number of children in the world with limbs blown off are the Palestinian children. What do you think is prioritized right now? I'll give you an example of one priority cause that took place in the United Kingdom. I mentioned to you that there's sort of concentric circles of kinds, maybe you can say, right? There are one level of priorities, those things which are wajib for us to invest in. Then a second level of things that are really highly mustahab. I mentioned to you, for example, yesterday, the library, the hawza ilmiya. Or, for example, in a community with many elderly, what would a cause be that is necessarily needed for many elderlies? Say again? Elderly. Funeral services amongst the wajibat. For example, what does Toronto have? Ahsant, senior citizens' homes. Can you see? Tertiary, secondary level, tertiary level. On the third level, there needs to be those things which now push the community in certain directions. I mentioned to you two of them yesterday. What were they? Tabligh and prisoners. In the UK, like you have here, but in the UK, we have a very prominent far-right propagandist media. The government that just got kicked out last Thursday in Britain for 14 years ruled and was a far-right terrorist government. And I say that with no equivocation. Far-right, evil, degenerate government that pitted people against one another, that murdered asylum seekers and refugees, let alone what they would do to the Muslim community. The Muslim community realized that there is a game being played between the government and the far-right media, owned especially by people like Rupert Murdoch. I don't know if you know, a few years ago in the UK, we had our own version of Fox News being created. Basically, everything that happens to you guys here, Britain is like 10, 20 years behind, and they finally figured out how to copy the Republican Party manifesto. When I say manifesto, I mean the whole project behind Fox News, behind Breitbart. It was lifted and dropped into the UK a couple of years ago, the model of it. It's called GB News, basically the same with Fox. Now, with the extent of the mass media and their demonization of Muslims and rampant Islamophobia, what do you think was needed in the Muslim community to fight against it? Are you going to rely on left-wing media? Here, can you rely on left-wing media to do that cause for you? Yes or no? What do you mean? You can't rely on MSNBC? The brother was so animated, he was like, absolutely not. I was just teasing. I know you can't rely on MSNBC. Subhanallah, Mehdi Hassan got booted out from left-wing media just for speaking about Palestine. He had to go and set up his own independent organization. Correct or not? Can you trust the left wing to support you and defend you? No. So what do you think the Muslims of the UK did? Ahsant. In what way specifically? The Muslims, the leadership, those with insight, value, they set up an organization called the Center for Media Monitoring, which monitors not only propagandist outlets, but also various different TV channels, mainstream terrestrial TV channels, to see the way in which Muslims are being portrayed. And whenever something happens, we now have a think tank and an institution that can hold the media to account for what they do, how they portray us, how they portray our sisters, how they portray our youth, the language that is being used to demonize the Muslims. And every time something happens, there is an institution that defends the entirety of the Muslims in their millions. And it's done huge benefits to the Muslims to secure them from a rampant knife that was constantly in their backs, in our backs. Who funded it? Was it MSNBC? Was it King Charles? Who funds it? Ahsantum. What does the Quran say? You are invited to invest in the causes of Allah, to defend yourselves. And if you don't, Allah will replace you with the community that will. This is important. Can you see the institutions that are needed? It may have been 10, 20 years ago we didn't need that institution, as an example. But you can see when the Muslims needed it, it comes to the forefront. Tell me something. If the ordinary Muslims understood this in Britain, do you not imagine the Prophet would have understood it? The Quran, what would he have done at that time? What would the Imam have done, Salamullahi alayhi, if he was present and was leading us? What would he have said? He would have used the same type of hadith of the Prophet, and he would have said, if you invest your money in this cause, it is this level of thawab for you. And everybody would have run to it. You would have all said, yeah, here's my sadaqah, here's my khums, here's my zakat. Go and set up this media for monitoring institution. Think about this as a very simple question. After 1400 years of Islam, should the Imam have to give you an increase in thawab for you to understand where your money should institutionally go to protect you? It's a serious question. It's not a rhetorical question. Maybe the early Muslims after year 1, year 5, year 10 needed the Prophet to explain to them in order to bring unity between the Muhajirin and the Ansar, in order to be able to lift the community to financial independence, invest in one another. It doesn't matter if he's from Mecca and I'm from Medina, you're from this tribe and I'm from that tribe. إِنَّمَا الْمُؤْمِنُونَ إِخْوَةٌ. So invest in one another. And then the Prophet would have reduced the thawab accordingly. Tell me something. If you are really understanding Islam today, would it need Imam Ma'soom al-Mahdi alayhi salam to come and tell you, invest in this project to protect yourselves? You would have done it. But by now, the Muslim community should be thinking, should be aware, should be cognizant, should have basira and insight that these are the needs of the community, these are the institutional causes that we have, and so we go and put our money where it needs to go. Do you understand? Am I making sense or am I not making sense? Nod if you're understanding what I'm trying to communicate. Ahsant. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Sometimes institutional causes come to the fore, and sometimes some of them go behind. It absolutely makes sense that our various charities are focusing on Aitam. Why? After Daesh, after the invasion by the United States, by Britain into Iraq, after ISIS, how many hundreds of thousands of orphans were there across Iraq, across Syria? Of course we need to invest in that. Can you see? That comes to the fore. And at other times, other issues come to the fore. But if we're not thinking and not cognizant and not aware, and we have no sense of where our priorities lie, where our money goes, our bang for our buck, as you say here in the United States of America. طيب. If you've understood this, we can move a little bit more forward. And I want to show you two institutional causes in the Quran and Ahadith raise that starts to raise the question of where at a national and global level should our institutional causes start to go to. I mentioned to you and I re-emphasize to you that where there is a particular type of dhulm, it should be that the Muslim community puts its efforts to respond to that dhulm as its priority. I gave the example and I'm going to reiterate so you understand it. I mentioned, for example, in India, it has a particular problem of violence against women, misogyny, rape. Do you know there are almost 100 rapes of women a day reported to the police in India? It is an institutional problem. And that's only how many get reported. Anyone who's from India, by the way, my grandparents are from India. I've had the honor of reciting twice Muharram in Bombay. I have a little bit of awareness and reading of what goes on in that country. I can tell you the level of institutional problem that exists. Would the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam have tolerated that behavior from the men of his country? Yes or no? He wouldn't have just intervened. Wallahi, thumma wallahi, thumma wallahi, he would have been relentless in his intervention, as would the Quran have been. He wouldn't have stood for this behavior, and he would have told the men to be men and to understand their role towards protecting women and changing the behavior and the culture of that country. How do I know it? Because he did that in Arabia 1400 years ago. Young girls are being born, buried alive, he intervened to stop it. Girls were treated as nothing more than inheritance when their own husbands died, that their sons inherited them like property, he stopped it. A woman couldn't speak against her husband lest violence fall down upon her, he stopped it. And not only that, he changed the course of behavior entirely in the way in which he acted and demonstrated towards women. When his daughter would walk in, he would stand up and give her his place. He would tell the men, the best amongst you are those who treat your wives the best. When someone would come to him and said, Ya Rasulullah, after you, whom should I love most? Whom did he say? Your mother. And then whom, Ya Rasulullah? Your mother. And then whom, Ya Rasulullah? Your. And then whom, Ya Rasulullah? Your. Ahsantum. Do you see? The Quran, the Hadith, the behavior of the Prophet systematically changed the behavior of the men such that over 23 years they left their pagan cultures and ways behind. This is how Islam prioritizes. When you see a particular dhulm in your community or a particular dhulm in your nation, you are supposed to speak out against it. You are supposed to fight it, intervene against it until it no longer remains. That's what your Prophet would have done. That's what your Imam would have done. That's what your Imam will do when he returns. May Allah hasten his reappearance. In each community, there are different needs, different challenges. This is how you understand how Islam works. Not fighting over stupid, nonsensical things that have nothing to do with religion, but actually reading the Quran and understanding how the Quran works, how the Sunnah of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam works. This is what Deen is, not what you're seeing out there and not what's on the pulpits. This is what Deen is. It relentlessly intervenes against dhulm, and it does not care for your feelings. Now, if you've understood this, that this is how the Quran and Sunnah actually works, I'm going to show you a couple of causes that if you were and I were to reflect on them and maybe start implementing them, we have the potential to change even a nation. Please open your Qur'ans to chapter number 2, Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 245. Now, inshallah, on Monday night, I hope to be able to have a presentation before the Salah with you. I'm going to present you some of the books that I published. One of the books is on this subject that I'm about to talk to you about. In the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has 6 verses encouraging giving loans or what's called qarḍ hasana. Have you heard of qarḍ and qarḍ hasana? Yes? What was qarḍ? We mentioned. The Prophet gave that huge reward in that hadith. You remember? If you just ask politely, you go across the Day of Judgment like a bolt of lightning. And if you are complaining about someone getting a loan from you, Jannah is made haram. So what was qarḍ? Loan. What is qarḍ hasana? What does that mean? What's a good loan? What's the difference between a loan and a good loan? Huh? What does that mean? No. Close. Qarḍ, if I lend you a loan. Qarḍ hasana, a goodly loan, is where I'm willing to write off the loan if you are unable to pay me back. No, it's not just giving money. let's say you genuinely can't pay me back, so I write off 1 month of the 12 months loan, or 6 months of the 12-month loan, or I say, don't worry about it, brother, you're all good. It's writing off a loan, or having the niyyah to write off the loan. Qard is that I'm expecting you to pay it back to me. Qard hasana is where I'm willing to write off part of the loan because I know that you genuinely cannot afford to pay me back. Have a look at the ayah. There are 6 verses of the Quran which talk about qard and qard hasana. Read this, just this one, because I don't want to prolong it. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Man dhal ladhi yuqridu Allah qardan hasana fayudha'ifahu lahu ad'afan kathira. Who will make a goodly loan to Allah, which He will repay you with many times over? The promise from your Creator and Sustainer is that if you give a loan that you are willing to write off a part of it, Allah will give it back to you many times over. Qard hasana. Now, this is an institutional course. But I'm going to expand on it properly so you have a real deep understanding of spaces where we can apply these things in the real world. There are 2 hadith that are extremely important. They come from Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam. One from the Prophet and one from the 6th Imam alayhim as-salam. And I want you to write down this hadith. Please open your notes page and just write down this hadith for me so at least you have it. I'm going to mention it in the Arabic and I'll mention it to you in the English. ألف درهم أقرضها مرتين أحب إلي من أن أتصدق بها مرة. This hadith is the same from the Prophet and the 6th Imam. If I give a loan, it is more beloved to me. That I give a loan, it is more beloved to me than if I give the same amount in charity. Just read it out back to me. Read it, don't worry, don't be shy. Ahsant. Think about this very carefully. Why would the Prophet and Imam as-Sadiq alayhim as-salam tell you that it's more beloved to them to give a loan to someone than the same amount in charity? Just take a pause and think about it. Sayyid comes and he asks me for charity. I'm picking on you a little bit today, I hope you don't mind. I give him $1,000 in charity. I'm the generous one here, man. He's always asking. I give him $1,000 in charity. I forget your name, bro. Yeah. Jari, ahsant. You were the one who knew the answers about the Tartib and Nuzuli. So Jari asks for a loan for $1,000 and I give him $1,000. According to our ahadith, which one is preferred by the Prophet? Okay, now I'm asking you why. No. I can rapport build with the Sayyid if I give him sadaqah. May Allah bless you. What's your name? Muhammad. Why did you come to that answer? May Allah bless you. Look at the ayah. If you give qard al-hasana, yudha'if. Allah will multiply it manifold. Did you all hear the reason? I'm going to repeat it. There are 4 reasons in the ahadith as to why it is preferential to give a loan over sadaqah. The main one is this. If I give that money to Brother Jari and then he gives it back to me, I have that amount that I can use again. Whereas if I give $1,000 to Sayyid, the money is gone. I'm not saying you're going to waste it. I'm just saying I don't have the money anymore. I've given him $1,000, it's gone. But I give you $1,000, inshallah you pay me back. I have $1,000 to do what? Ahsant, to loan to someone else. I don't have to loan it to someone. I can go and buy Knicks tickets with it. I'm a San Antonio Spurs fan, by the way. But I can do something else with that money, right? The Prophet told you there is more thawab and more love if you give that money in qarz than in sadaqah. Tell me something, just as a by the by, about institutional causes. Hands up. How many different loan initiatives in Shi'i New York are there compared to how many charities? How many loan organizations are there? Zero. But we just read that the Prophet prefers loans over sadaqah, and we even explained it and rationalized it. In my book, I explain all the 4 reasons. Can you see the problem, my brothers and sisters? Can you see the problem? We have ahadith and texts from Ahlul Bayt alayhim wasalam, and then we explain, and people, may Allah bless us, we don't know yet. We haven't got there yet. We're still fighting about whether the blood of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam is tahir, or whether someone does zanjir, it's tahir. What a waste of my life. Seriously, what's going on? Look at the causes Ahlul Bayt alayhim wasalam have actually told us about. And we end up arguing about things that have no real world concern, no real world help. Now, we in the school of Ahlul Bayt alayhim wassalam know that if you give a loan and there is any condition to it, it becomes riba, correct? Everybody knows that? Interest. So now I've given my brother Jari $1,000. It's more beloved than giving $1,000 in sadaqah. So I've given you $1,000. But if I put any shart, any condition, it becomes riba. I'll give you $1,000, but you have to give me $1,100 back at the end of the month. Haram or not? Haram. Brother, I'll give you $1,000, but you have to come mow my lawn on the weekend. Condition. No. If haram. If it's a shart, if it's a condition, it is haram. Riba isn't only financial gain. Any increase in benefit is haram shar'an. But in the school of Ahlul Bayt alayhim wassalam, number one, if he wants to give me $1,100 back, it's mustahab. Number one. Number two, if he wants to give me any benefit in kind, it is mustahab. And if I ask for a benefit, but it's not a shart, a condition, it is also mustahab. Brother Jari, do you recite Quran nicely? MashaAllah. I would be grateful. I'm going to give you the $1,000, but I'd be grateful if you could come home and teach my daughter Quran once a week. Would you mind doing that for me? Out of your willingness to do it. Ahsantum. In the school of Ahlul Bayt alayhim wassalam, this is mustahab. I'll read to you one example of a hadith from our 6th Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq salawatullah wa salamuhu alayhi. And for those who want to know, this chain of narration is sahih. Sa'altu Aba Abdullah alayhi salam. The companion Muhammad ibn Muslim said, I asked Imam as-Sadiq alayhi salam, عن الرجل يستقرض من الرجل قرضا ويعطيه الرهن إما خادما إما آنية وإما ثيابا. Person has been given a loan and he's given a deposit in return. Either a servant or a tool or piece of clothing. فيحتاج إلى شيء من منفعة. But the person wants something back in return, some benefit, some manfa'ah in return. فَيَسْتَأْذِنُ فِيهِ فَيَأْذِنُ لَهَا. Is it permissible قال عليه السلام إذا طابت نفسه فلا بأس. If he's okay with it, it's no problem. Not shart, asking. Can you see the difference? Would you mind coming over to my house and teaching my daughter Quran? Yes? No problem. إذا طابت نفسه فلا بأس. قلت, the companion said to Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, إن من عندنا يرون أن كل قرض يجر منفعة فهو فساد. We understood that whenever you ask for a manfa'a, it is haram. فقال عليه السلام أوليس خير القرض ما جر منفعة. Is not the best type of qard the one in which there is mutual benefit? No, any condition of any kind is haram. You can tell him, but you can't put a condition on him. Sometimes you do have to tell people, get you off the couch. No, again, as a condition, haram. Any condition, any shart, in which you are enforcing any return on the loan, it is haram. Okay, this is very important. That condition is fine. You have to pay me in this amount of time, but that's not an increase on the loan. You understand? It's an increase on the loan. I give him $1,000, I ask for a cent back, haram. Now, I don't want to make this into a Q&A. Tafadhal. Yeah, you can say that. You can say that. But if he considers it to be a condition, if he's interpreted it as a condition, like, you have loan sharks, and they're like, it would be really good for you if you gave me $100 extra. You understand what me and my man Mario are saying? Click, click. Is that طاب نفسه or is that shart? أحسنت. زين? Okay, this is really important. In our communities, we are emphasized to give loans over charity. And clearly by now you know that it's supposed to be interest free. Everybody knows that? Yes? That's a huge institutional cause. We are supposed to help one another build the community's bonds and trust and awareness of one another through this. Why? Where is everybody going instead? Where? Banks. We live in a hyper financialized state. You go and buy gas, you put it on the credit card, you're paying $1. You go and buy groceries, you're putting it on the credit card, you're paying everything that we do is geared towards this. The whole system is set up to steal from you. And people who are in genuine need of small loans, medium loans, $500 for this month to survive, $10,000 to be able to invest in a business, something, they are going to these crooks because our own communities haven't bothered to set up financial institutions that can help one another. If we actually looked at what the Quran told us and where our emphasis was, long time ago we would have said, and by the way, there are many different communities that have Qard al-Hasana, Qard projects and bank projects. For New York, which is the financial capital of the world, for our own Muslim and Shia brethren not to have something. Where are we? This is 2024. Do you know in our communities we have literal billionaires? Billionaires. And we still don't have a Shia bank here in the financial capital of the world. We don't have a community qard project that says that if you need $1,000 till the end of the month, $10,000 to be able to do something, instead of going to these crooks you can actually get a loan from one of us. Why? Because the emphasis is on sadaqah, 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 sadaqah. Whereas the hadith of the Prophet was what? It is more beloved to me to give $1 in qard than it is in sadaqah. Now I'm going to take you one step further. I want you to have some imagination with me for a second, okay? If we can lend one another and have institutions, financial institutions, properly set up to lend one another at 0% interest, because that's what Islam demands from us. Can we not also give 0% interest loans to non-Muslims? Yes or no? Yes. I want you just to think with me. Forget how I word it with you. I want you to think with me. Imagine a billboard or a video running 24/7 in Times Square. Come to the Prophet Muhammad Bank. If you need a small loan of $1,000 to $10,000, we will give it to you interest free. Do you know why? Because this is what Islam thinks of you. That you should not be allowed to be exposed to exploitation. And when you are taking a loan from this bank and that bank, and on this credit card and on that credit card, and you are paying 20% interest every single month, and you're paying 10% interest on every single month, you are being ripped off as a human being. The Prophet Muhammad would never have allowed this. He loves you so much, and Islam wants you to be prosperous. Come to the Prophet Muhammad Bank and we will give you a 0% interest loan. Forget how I've worded it. Understand the vision. Tell me, which person, logical person, will still go to this bank and getting charged 20% a month instead of going to Nabi Muhammad Bank and getting 0% interest? Which one? Which logical person would do it? Now forget whether they come or they don't come. Imagine it as a means of tabligh and da'wah. These people, may Allah bless them, many of them think of the Prophet as what? Prophet of war, terrorism, paedophile, na'udhu billah. That's what they think, don't they? Yes or no? Whom amongst you is going to present the true image of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam? Whom? Many of you here are in the financial institutions. It's not difficult to set these things up. If everybody else can set it up, why can't you set it up? Why can't I set it up? Can you imagine a world where we can break the banking institutions, where we can actually sever it and say, here is a genuine banking institution that looks after people, that cares for people? This is what Al Saud was supposed to be doing with the trillions of dollars that they have from oil money. Not using it to be able to blow up kids in Yemen. So it falls on me and you. But I promise you, we have millionaires and billionaires in this community, and you know it's true. You see their houses in Long Island. You go to their houses. You see the cars that they drive. Don't tell me that there aren't people in this community that can't put together a fund, that even if you give 1,000 loans, it doesn't matter. But to have that billboard and start a conversation in the financial capital of the world, in the institutions in this community, and to start a conversation, imagine if we had Muhammad Bank that actually helped people and told them, don't go and make these pigs richer and richer. You can look after one another. I'll give you one more and then we'll conclude. Hadith from the Holy Prophet Muhammadin al-Mustafa sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. You can write down this hadith as well if you want, just so you know these things exist. And you go back to it tomorrow and the next day and it's on your mind. You think about it, you talk about it. Hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam says this: La yuba'u dain bid-dain. A loan shall not be sold by another loan. Hands up, how many of you are in finance here? One. What's it called when you sell a loan on, or someone purchases another loan? What's the term for it? Not quite refinancing. It's called securitization. Have you heard of securitization? Anyone who's lived through the 2008 crash knows about securitization, really. Let me explain. Bank lends you a loan. Mortgage. 25 years. I'm just picking a figure for the sake of picking the figure, $2,000 a month. Can the bank sell your loan to someone else? Yes or no? Yes. Do you know why they sell those loans? Has anyone ever thought about it? Huh? Yeah, the bank makes money. Why does the bank money? How does the bank make money? There are many reasons. There are about 6, but I'll just give you a very brief understanding so you all get it very simply. Again, my dear brother Sayyid, I lend him for a mortgage at $2,000 a month. And then I sell the loan on to Bank Jari. Why would I do that? Number one, when I give Sayyid this loan, I know whether he can actually afford it or not afford it. I don't care whether he can afford it or not afford it. What I want is the interest. The moment I start making that money, I'm good, I'm golden, I'm earning money, I'm the bank. But the moment I see that the country is going into a slide, or the bubble is going to burst, or I watch his portfolio and I know that he's lost his job, he's still my problem, isn't he? He could default on the loan and I'm not going to get my money back. So what do I do before that happens? What do I do? Sell the loan. It's now Bank Jari's problem. Not my problem. I've made my 2 years of interest. I've made my 3 years of interest. It's now his problem. Now he buys the loan. Why would he buy the loan if it's not a great loan? Say again? He buys it indeed for a lower price. So what does he benefit? He buys it for a lower price. So he hedges his bet and he hopes he's going to make that money. If he doesn't and he goes into bankruptcy or he can't pay it, he gets to chase him for it. And all along, he gets to add little fees along the way. So he benefits. Now what happens? All of a sudden he sees, I'm not going to make the money back. Where does he go? He sells it to, what's your name, brother? Kazim, Bank Kazim. And so on and so on and so forth. This is what happened in 2008. This is one of the things that happened in 2008. This is one of the things that's happening now. Banks institutionally sell your loans onto others. Every type of loan, your credit card loan. Just humble advice, don't have a credit card if you don't need it. Your credit card loan, your mortgage, all of it's up for sale. People in America, United States, cumulatively, you own $1 trillion in debt. Just in credit card debt. Not everything else. Not student loans, not mortgages. Credit card debt, $1 trillion. And all of that is constantly shifting from me to this bank, to that bank, to that bank. And they're constantly making extra money from you. In the West, there is a group of economists that are called moral economists. You can write it down and just Google it, so that tomorrow you can just read it on Wikipedia if you want. You know, there's capitalism, there's communism, there's also moral economy, where the whole of the law is rooted in that which is moral and ethical and not exploitative and abusive laws. These are not Muslims. This is non-Muslims in the West, in America, that try to push through legislation. Understand this. 1400 years ago, your prophet said the words, La yuba'u dain bid-dain. Do not sell the loan to another loan. All it takes is for us to realize how much people are being exploited. And if Muslims got together and to speak to their Congress people, to speak to lawmakers, to try to push moral laws, there are organizations that you could collaborate with. It's not about the glory of you doing it. It's about implementing the hadith of the Prophet institutionally and helping reshape this world to a better world. Imagine tomorrow that moral legislation could be passed. How many trillions of dollars would people be saved instead of being constantly exploited and corrupted? Muslims could do it. Muslims could take it seriously. It could be one project that one nation of Muslims gathers and participates in. One community participates in. And you might one day be able to change a law. Hell, they change laws all the time in every other area of walk of life. Why can't they change this one for you? Every single month they're writing 100 new laws. Why can't this be the one law to protect the rights of consumers? Why can't it come from you? Why can't it come from the Prophet? When we say that there are institutional causes that fight against the types of oppression that are present in your world, this is what we are talking about. That's what the Prophet brought. He relentlessly fought against these oppressions until one by one, he knocked those pins over. And you know what happened? The people loved him for it. The people flocked to him for it. The people were willing to fight for it and die for it. This is how you reshape a world. Away from dhulm and towards that which is adl. Inshallah, tomorrow we will continue with another subject. But all I want, it is me. That is me. That's right. It's me on the screen, brother. Hi. Ahsant. What I want you to take away from tonight's discussion is the potential to reshape this world. That there are causes that the Quran and Ahadith demand us to participate our time and wealth in. And some of them can change small things within a community. Some of them can potentially change a city. Some of them can potentially change a nation. But so long as we are unaware of these institutional causes or where our institutions should be focused on, then we won't have any way to be able to reform the world that is being demanded from us to be able to help reform it. Tonight, we commemorate the martyrdom anniversaries of Hazrat Aun and Muhammad, salamullahi alayhima, the children of Abdullah bin Ja'far, and Aun, the son of Sayyida Zainab, alayha salam. I want you to imagine that on the night of Ashura, Aun and Muhammad are inside the tents, and Sayyida Zainab alayha salam sits down with these two young children and begins to have a conversation with them in preparation for tomorrow's battle. Which mother tells their son, I don't want Hussein to have to come to me and say that I don't have any helpers. Please, can someone go to the battlefield? I want you to precede Hussein, and I want to make sure that you do not come back. You have to give your life for your uncle Abu Abdullah al-Hussein. This is the conversation that is being had in the tent on the night of Ashura. Some of the poets, they word it like this. They say that Sayyida Zainab alayha salam told Aun and Muhammad, don't allow me to be embarrassed in front of my mother Fatima Zahra on the day of judgment. Because all of the other mothers, they are preparing their sons for tomorrow. The husbands are being prepared by their wives tomorrow.
Don't let it be that I arrive on the day of judgment and I have to turn my face away from Fatima and say I did not give everything in the way of her son Hussein ibn Ali. No, my sons, you must be amongst the first to be able to charge into battlefield. I want you to imagine these two young boys with their ages of being just at a tender age of maybe 10 and 12 years old, or maybe 8 and 10 years old. Tell me something. How heavy is a sword? How heavy is a shield? How much strength does a 10-year-old boy have to be able to wield a sword in front of an army of 30,000? And tell me, when they shot their arrows towards Owen and Muhammad, what would have happened when they raised their shields? Can you imagine how many arrows must have showered down on these two young children? Can you imagine being surrounded by thousands of men baying for their blood? These armies of Yazid are trained soldiers on horses. They have spears. I want you to imagine a 10-year-old boy standing in the middle of the battlefield and a horseman riding towards him with his spearhead and thrusting it towards Aun and Muhammad. What chance do these two young boys have? But nevertheless, they fought like lions, so brave. They killed many of the enemies and sent them towards hellfire. Our poets tell us that the army of Yazid realized that they could not kill them in this way, so they said the only way we can kill these two children is if we separate them from one from the other. I want you to imagine an army of men coming in between, horses trying to ride down these two children, such that they have to throw themselves out of the way. And this may be how Azraun and Muhammad might have separated from themselves. Then I want you to imagine how an older brother looks after a younger brother. Imagine Aun saying, "Oh Muhammad, where are you? Come back, I need to look after you." And I want you to imagine a younger brother, how he feels when he's separated from his older brother. And he must have said, "Oh my brother Aun, where are you? Please come back to me." It is with the separation of these two young brothers that they are surrounded by the enemies. You can imagine they would have been showered upon by arrows and by spears and by sticks and by stones and by swords. Both of them would have fallen and been cut to pieces. I want you to imagine Imam al-Hussein arriving at the bodies of Odin Muhammad. What would he have said? How could he have turned back towards Zainab? You can imagine Hussein is ashamed to bring the bodies of Aun and Muhammad back to Zainab. But at the same time, you can imagine Zainab is so proud of what her children have accomplished. Our poets tell us that she goes into sajda and thanks Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Do you know where this comes from? It comes from a hadith that is actually about Abdullah bin Ja'far. It is said that when the caravan returns and tells Abdullah bin Ja'far of the news of the killing of his two sons, the way in which one tells him, they say, "Oh Abdullah, Hussein caused this. Hussein is the one that made you lose your children." He gets angry with them. He says, "By Allah, I am so happy that if I wasn't there to defend Hussein, then at least my two children were there to defend Hussein." If this is the reaction of Abdullah bin Ja'far, can you imagine the reaction of Zainab on the 10th of Muharram? She would have said to them, "Don't bring the bodies back. I don't want to see them. All I want to know is my Hussein safe? When he went out to collect the bodies, did they attack my brother Hussein? Is Hussein okay?" This is the love that Zainab had for Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. ألا لعنة الله على القوم الظالمين وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون. Please raise your hands, join me in dua. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to hasten the appearance of Imam al-Mahdi alayhi salam, to allow us to be alongside him at all times in our life and in our death. If we are to pass away before his coming, Ya Allah, raise us from our graves so that we can partake in the victories of Muhammad and Ali Muhammad. Matim Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein,
Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein.
Brother Kian? Ya Hussein.
बाबा रात हो गई, बाबा रात हो गई, बाबा रात हो गई, बाबा रात हो गई। बाबा मेरे बाबा, आओ ढल गया सूरज। बाबा मेरे बाबा, आओ ढल गया सूरज। नोहा था सकीना का, आओ ढल गया सूरज। बाबा मेरे बाबा, आओ ढल गया सूरज। सिर्फ अपने सीने पर शब गुजार लेने दो, चैन से मेरे बाबा एक दफा तो सोने दो। सुबह फिर चले जाना, आओ ढल गया सूरज। बाबा मेरे बाबा, आओ ढल गया सूरज। बाबा मेरे बाबा, आओ। दोनों हाथ फैलाए मैं तुम्हें बुलाती हूँ, इस अंधेरे जिंदा में कितना घबराती हूँ। अब नहीं रहा जाता, आओ ढल गया सूरज। बाबा मेरे बाबा, आओ ढल गया सूरज। बाबा मेरे बाबा। बस तुम्हारे जाते ही घर जले चनी चादर, शिमर मेरे कानों से छीन ले गया गोहर। जुल्म हो गए क्या क्या, आओ ढल गया सूरज। बाबा मेरे बाबा, आओ ढल गया सूरज। बाबा मेरे बाबा, आओ ढल गया सूरज। या हुसैन, या हुसैन, या हुसैन, या हुसैन।
زيارة. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. السلام عليك يا رسول الله، السلام عليك يا حبيب الله، السلام عليك يا خيرة من خلق الله ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليك يا أمير المؤمنين، السلام عليك يا سيد الوصيين، السلام عليك يا إمام المتقين ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليك يا خديجة الكبرى، السلام عليك يا فاطمة الزهراء سيدة النساء العالمين، السلام عليك يا حسن بن علي المجتبى، السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله حسين بن علي بشهيد كربلاء، السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين. السلام عليك وعلى أخيك أبي الفضل عباس وعلى أختك الحوراء زينب وعلى 9 المعصومين بذرية الحسين، علي بن الحسين زين العابدين ومحمد بن علي الباقر وجعفر بن محمد الصادق وموسى بن جعفر الكاظم وعلي بن موسى الرضا ومحمد بن علي التقي وعلي بن محمد النقي والحسن بن علي الأسكري والحجة بن الحسن القائم المهدي. السلام عليك يا شريك القرآن، السلام عليك يا كعبة الإيمان، السلام عليك يا إمام الإنس والجان، السلام عليكم أهل البيت النبوة جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته.